exposing hypocrisy, bad faith arguments, and outright lies. This is Agora America.
All right, today we're digging into a detailed, analytical report that presents a really sweeping critique of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The core argument here is that DEI isn't just falling short of its goals, but that it's actually built on a foundation that leads to predictable, negative outcomes.
And the report does not pull any punches. I mean, it opens with this incredibly powerful thesis, basically arguing that the entire DEI framework is fundamentally flawed right from the very start. So we're not talking about small fixes here. The analysis claims the whole structure is the problem. Okay, let's dive in.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll walk through the report's main arguments, its core premise, what it calls the zero-sum argument, the unintended consequences, the erosion of standards, the ideological framework, and then finally we'll look at the report's conclusion.
So where does this whole critique really begin? Well, the analysis zooms in on one key term that it claims is the source of pretty much all the issues that follow, and that word is equity.
Now, this is super important. The report is really specific about what it means by equity. It's not just about general fairness. No, it claims it's a very particular policy goal, engineering equal results for different demographic groups. And to do that, you have to treat individuals differently based on their identity. The report argues this single shift creates a whole cascade of failures down the line.
So that brings us to the report's first big claim. It says that when you chase this specific kind of equity, you inevitably create a zero-sum game, a situation where, for one person to win, someone else has to lose, and it's all based on their group identity.
And this slide really lays out the two different worlds the report is describing. On one side, you've got fair processes for individuals. On the other, you have engineered demographic results for groups. The analysis argues that when you have a limited number of promotions or college spots, mandating an outcome for one group means you have to exclude an individual from another, not because of their merit, but because of their identity.
And the report says, look, this isn't just theory. It points to some pretty staggering numbers as a real-world consequence. It brings up shareholder lawsuits against Target, which claimed the company's DEI policies led to a massive loss of over $15 billion in market value. The argument there was that management had breached its duty to shareholders by putting ideology ahead of smart business strategy.
Okay, so this table breaks down the different kinds of trouble the report sees brewing. First, you've got regulatory violations, things that go against the Civil Rights Act. Then you have those fiduciary duty breaches, like the ones alleged at Target. And finally, the critique points to something it calls regulatory paralysis. It highlights a case with Verizon where the FCC told them to end their DEI programs for a deal, but state regulators told them they had to keep them. I mean, talk about a legal catch-22.
Okay, next up, the report dives into what it calls the unintended consequences of all this. It claims that not only do these policies create risk, but they're also a form of social engineering that can, and often does, backfire.
And here's where things get kind of ironic. According to the analysis, the report points to research showing that mandatory diversity programs can actually do the opposite of what they're supposed to. Instead of fostering harmony, they can increase conflict. The report argues that when people feel like they're being targeted or forced into these trainings, it doesn't create understanding. It breeds resistance and resentment.
On top of that, the report makes a really bold argument. It says there's a huge data vacuum. Basically, these programs have been rolled out everywhere way faster than any real scientific proof that they work. Very few are actually tracked with rigorous, peer-reviewed studies. The document even cites a finding that 2/3 of HR specialists, the very people who run these programs, say they don't produce positive effects.
All right, now we're getting into what is probably the report's most, let's say, controversial point. It focuses on the impact that mandating equal outcomes has on things like merit, competence, and objective standards.
And the report uses this simple but powerful metaphor to explain its point. It claims that if your goal is to guarantee that all demographic groups cross the finish line at the exact same time, the only practical way to make that happen is to just move the finish line closer for everyone. In other words, you have to lower the standards.
So to back this up, the report points to some pretty sobering data from our schools. It argues that during the same period that DEI expanded everywhere, proficiency scores on national tests actually went down for the very same student groups these policies were meant to help. The suggestion here is that the approach itself might actually be counterproductive.
And the report argues this isn't just about grade school. The critique goes all the way to some really high-stakes fields.
It cites claims that medical schools are admitting people with lower test scores based on identity, and that the military is under intense pressure to lower its fitness standards for diversity goals. The source basically says the need for competence doesn't just disappear. The risk just gets pushed onto patients and national security.
Okay, so for our final point, we're zooming out a bit to look at the big picture, the philosophical roots of all this, according to the report. It presents this as the root cause of all the other issues we've talked about.
So the report's argument here is that DEI isn't just a set of HR policies. It claims it's built on a very specific ideology that comes from critical social justice theory. And this worldview, it claims, sees all of society through one lens, a constant power struggle between oppressor and oppressed groups. And that's not just an observation, it's the non-negotiable starting point for everything.
And this is where the report claims it all gets locked in. That ideological starting point, it says, creates this dangerous cycle. To justify the constant intervention that equity requires, certain groups have to be seen as perpetual victims. This creates what the report calls a policy lock-in, where institutions feel like they can't say no to any demand made in the name of the oppressed, no matter how extreme, because if they do, they'll be accused of siding with the oppressor.
Woo! Okay, so after laying out this pretty intense critique, the zero-sum game, the unintended consequences, the erosion of standards, and this ideological lock-in, what's the solution? What does the report say we should do instead?
Well, the report doesn't recommend small changes. It calls for a complete teardown. It advocates for the mandated end of all race-conscious policymaking and dismantling the entire DEI infrastructure. And in its place, the report calls for a return to race-neutral, merit-based systems that focus on individual skills and transparent, objective performance.
So at the end of the day, this analysis is throwing down a major challenge. It isn't just questioning how we're doing DEI, it's challenging the fundamental premise of whether the current model can ever work at all. And that leaves us with a really critical question. What does a path forward based on these competing visions actually mean for the future of diversity and fairness in our institutions?
This is Agora America.